I hope y'all got sight of our Monster Mash dancers over here. I know last week when Tom was here, we did that little dance, that little Jewish dance that we do. I don't know why we didn't get up and do monster mashing today. Tom McDermott is away on a trip, leading a group along with his wife Linda to Germany. They're going to do a lot of interesting stuff that I'm sure we're going to get to hear about when he comes back. So I'm Charme Robarts. I'm jumping in here today, and I'm going to talk about monsters. As I said, it's just not too late in the Halloween season to do that. Did I say this? I hope this is the 8th day of Halloween. May your true love bring to you 8 pieces of dark chocolate. Yes. What do you think? Yeah. Okay. So clearly, we are fascinated by monsters. I mean, think about it. Millions of us turn out to watch zombie movies. I think vampires could probably be included in the next U.S. Census as a growing minority group. Of course, video games. I mean, video games, I think they generate $74 billion a year. Great storytelling medium, and they're populated by monsters, right? We love monsters. And monsters aren't new, of course. Throughout the centuries, every culture has monsters in their literature and in their storytelling. The Bible has monster stories. There's giants there, right? The big fish. The witch that shows up in the Saul and Samuel story. And then there's the scapegoat who's sent out of the community, bearing away the sins of the people. Greek and Roman mythology, how about Medusa with the whole snake hairdo going? And of course, Cyclops with the big eyes. So we got monsters everywhere. And academics from almost every field, sociology, psychology, literature, history, media, they have really looked into this, and we can all go down to TCU and take a course in some kind of monster. It's just everywhere. And these academics have provided some really good insights for us on this. And So I want to share with you a few things that I've been thinking about over time that I've certainly learned from these studies. I'm going to mention a few monsters, and then I'll just raise some questions and make some observation. So first I want to talk about Frankenstein, or Frankenstein, if you watched Young Frankenstein. There's a lot of difference between the Mary Shelley story that she wrote and the films and plays that followed, but here are some important parts of the story. First of all, Dr. Frankenstein creates this monster, and then he's horrified at his own creation, and he ends up abandoning it. Second, the village people, of course, are rightly frightened by the monster's appearance. But interestingly, on that note, even though everybody's scared to death of how he looks, do you remember that Dr. Frankenstein's father is actually blind? And in Mary Shelley's story, when he encounters the monster, he treats him kindly, drawing out a theme of how easy it is for us to be afraid of someone because of how they look. So that's a point that I think is worth thinking about. This is a big theme in Frankenstein and in almost every monster story. Victims become victimizers. The monster's a victim because he's ostracized, he's lonely, he's been abandoned by his father, so he's going around taking revenge. The villagers, the townspeople, of course, are victims because the monster keeps killing them off. And throughout the whole story, they're all just trying to kill each other. Frankenstein's trying to kill them. They're trying to kill him. Victims become victimizers. This is a huge theme in monster stories. And then there's vampires. Oh, man, vampires are an interesting lot. In the old stories of vampires, they were usually from the elite class. They were counts and countesses and barons, and they were evil. In the new stories, in our new stories of vampires, they're still elite people, but they're elite because they're beautiful and sexy and ever young, just like the old vampires were. And we find ourselves sort of drawn to these monsters and also afraid of them. That's also a recurring theme in monster literature. There's this attraction and repulsion going on. And then there's werewolves. And I saw that Lori wore her werewolf jacket. Good for you. Thank you so much. And then, of course, Werewolves of London. If you didn't pay attention to the words of that, I invite you to Google them and look them up. But werewolves are an interesting group, too, because they absolutely have some self-loathing going on. They know what's going to happen. They don't want to go there. The sight of the moon drives the werewolf mad because he knows he's going to change into this monster, and he just doesn't want to go there. I think his cousin might be the Incredible Hulk of our turn, because, the Hulk was always dreading. He tries not to become angry because he's going to turn into a monster. I think in one famous Incredible Hulk movie or something, he says, "Don't make me mad." He knows he's going to turn into a monster. And so perhaps these monsters are a reflection of, sort of the inner shame we have over our inner monster, I should say. Finally, there's zombies. I love zombies, because they travel in packs. They're into community. I love community. We love community. I love zombies. They travel. But you know what? They're the working class monsters, really. They're the working class monsters because you don't have to do anything to be a monster, a zombie, except be undead and go around stumbling and consuming everything in sight. And so you can imagine that the commentary on zombies by sociologists and others is that they're a reflection of our culture, always consuming but never satisfied, just like Mick Jagger said. So zombies, they're kind of cool, and we feel a little bit familiar with them. So there's a lot I could say about these monsters and all monsters, but here's a few observations. First, a common feature seems to be that they are a reflection of our fears of external things out there that we can't control, things found in nature, in science, in technology. People who comment on these stories talk about, many of the features of a particular story arise because of fear of what's going on out there. Even in the Mary Shelley Frankenstein, there's interest in the fact that there was all this advancement going on in medicine, and that people were beginning to talk about what is the true meaning of life and death. And so as she writes her story, it's a reflection of that fear, reflection of what we've created and that we cannot perhaps control. So monster stories reveal our fears about things that are external, but also monster stories reveal our fears of internal things, the monster we might become. Things on the inside of us that we notice that are dark, like Richard Rohr and many of our other spiritual leaders are pointing out to us. We're aware of our shadow side, and so sometimes, the monster story is a reflection of the fear we have. I'm pretty sure that anybody who's ever thought long and hard about the real events of Hitler's regime have wondered, would I have been one of the ones that went along with that? And so monster stories can kind of help us back up and think about ourselves and our thoughts and who we are. I don't want to forget, though, that monster stories are also fun and imaginative, and in them are the great heroes. I mean, think about it. Who doesn't want to be the hero sometime and save the day? I know I've still got my Wonder Woman cape hanging in the closet, and I know Greg Froman has a Superman cape. Who doesn't want to be the hero sometimes? So monster stories reveal that desire we have to save the day, sort of. And those monsters are usually hybrids. They're part human, part bird, part human, part spider, and so forth. But right beside that, who among us hasn't known the temptation to become a hero at the expense of someone else? To become a hero at the expense of someone else's dignity. I think we all know that temptation, and a monster story helps us think about that. So, all of this is fun, and all of these stories are good for us in some ways, from being just a fun expression of our fears to being a chance to step back and think about ourselves and think about the universal themes of human life. It's interesting to me that in almost every monster story, in the monster himself or herself, there's an element of good and bad. of light and dark, of victim and victimizer. We often end up feeling sympathy for the monster. Ever watch Beauty and the Beast? Yeah, you kind of feel sorry for the monster in the end. So we're familiar with this struggle of being both good and bad, and sometimes we don't know quite what to do with it, but one thing we know is that when we're feeling sorry for that monster, maybe that's an awareness of our own darkness and our own need for understanding and mercy. So maybe this is a good cue to think about those important words that Jesus spoke, the ones that Carolyn read to us. The part about, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your friend's eye and pay absolutely no attention to the log that's in your own eye? Good question, huh? I've heard that story all my life, or that little saying of Jesus all my life. And deep in my psyche, when I would read that, I would go, oh, yeah, of course I need to pay attention to my own faults. Yeah, I need to make sure my life is in order. But I really just couldn't wait to get to that part where I get to straighten you out. That's my truth. I was willing to admit I might have, something going on in me that needs to be straightened out, but my impulse was to go toward straightening you out. Well, over time, I've tried to hear that saying of Jesus a different way. I've tried to imagine just the comedic picture that he paints for us of a person walking around with this is my log right here, big log in my eye. Well, one observation about that is I'm actually pretty far from you. I can't even get close to you. So how in the world is it that I know that you have the speck in your eye? So that's something for me to think about. But so I keep imagining, and I imagine taking the log out of my eye, and then suddenly I am able to get a little bit closer to you, and I see that, hey, you're not quite so bad. You're not crazy. You're not wrong all the time. You're not a monster. That has been helpful to me, to think of it that way, and I hope so to you. Psychologists note that we sometimes project onto others the struggles that we are having with ourselves. And it's kind of like another famous passage that's in the Bible. Paul wrote about the struggle that's within him, within us. He says, the thing that I want to do, the good thing that I want to do, I leave undone. The thing I mean not to do, I do anyway. And so there's this war inside of me, Paul says. Psychologists note that sometimes, because we're kind of at war with ourselves, we end up just projecting all that onto other people and focusing on their faults. We end up making monsters. Now, it's really easier to make a monster out of you than for me to figure out my own stuff. But guess what? Figuring out my own stuff might mean learning to embrace that I am both good and bad. And so are you. It's what it is to be human. At the end of that passage that I just mentioned, where Paul talks about this internal war, he ends up going, who's going to save me from this struggle? His answer is Jesus. But I would like to point out that it is not helpful to slap a Jesus sticker on everything and just end it there. Stay with me. It's not helpful just to say Jesus. And I don't really think that's what Paul was doing either. I don't think the whole of Christian doctrine is saying just, say Jesus. Just say, I'm a believer. Because in fact, experientially, we all know that just because we have faith does not mean that inner struggle is over. Does it? Don't we still struggle to do right when we should? Don't we still struggle to resist wrong things when we should? Of course we do. So that must not be what it all means. But maybe the way we get saved is when we're walking in the way of Jesus, we begin to understand that we all mess up. I mess up, you mess up, we're all a little bad, we're all a little good, And maybe in the way of faith, along that path, we see that about each other, and when we fall down, we pick each other up. And there will be love and mercy, and not a quick rush to judgment. Maybe that's how we get saved from all of this internal struggle. And so perhaps the best thing that people of faith can do, the best thing that the church can do, is to embrace ourselves as strugglers, with a little good and a little bad going on in all of us. But unfortunately, too often the church church members have tried to come off like white knights with perfection, perfect in every way, and therefore somehow qualified to decide that other people are monsters. And so we can burn them at the stake. We can burn crosses in their yards. We can send them to the gas chambers. We can call them ungodly and impure and refuse to rent them apartments and refuse to let them in our churches. And we can do all of this in the name of God. Because we fear differences in people, differences in ideas, different beliefs, because we do this, because we are afraid, sometimes we want to isolate ourselves. And what better way to do that than to turn people into monsters? And so we're kind of good sometimes at monster making. You know, the central story of Christianity includes, of course, the chapter on the death of Jesus. And in some ways, that story's like the monster stories. A mob of people frightened by what Jesus was saying and what the government might think about what Jesus was saying and what implications that might have for them. A mob of people who included religious leaders who were resentful of Jesus' growing popularity. A mob of people who didn't understand Jesus' views on God, Jesus' views on humanity. A mob of people who didn't like what he said about money and loving our enemies. A mob of people who just didn't understand why he wouldn't just go ahead and overthrow the government. A mob of people who were afraid he would overthrow the government. Anyway, whoever they were, they killed him, probably thinking he was a monster. Because you know what? It's pretty hard to kill somebody unless you think they're a monster. So they must have thought he was an evil monster. And as it turns out, of course, they were wrong. We killed the wrong guy. So the Christian faith recognizes, of course, that the death of Christ somehow saves us. And that's a time-worn truth for us. But I think among the many things we could ask about that is, what exactly does it save us from? And I wonder if we're being saved from making other people into monsters. Isn't that possible? These are highly charged times that we live in. And it seems that many tragedies occur because we're afraid of something or someone. We have decided that our lives are fueled by fear and not by hope. And so I keep wondering, maybe if we are to be saved from the monsters within and the monsters without, maybe it's a good thing to remember the words of Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, anytime you start hunting and killing monsters, make sure you don't become one. So maybe we are saved by walking in faith and refusing to light the torches of unexamined, hateful speech, refusing to light the torches of mob mentality, and instead deciding to embrace our common humanity with all of its strengths and weaknesses, so that maybe we might not destroy each other. Amen.